Hello, everybody. Good to see some familiar faces have joined us today. Abby, nice to see you. Astrid as well. Mr. Komusi, very pleased you can join us today as well. Thanks, everyone. We'll just give it 30 more seconds and then we'll kick off. Good to see you too, Yogesh. Hopefully, the Ugandan context is relevant to some extent to the Zambia context as well. So good to see you. Thank you for coming. Okay, thank you once again, everybody. My name is Sam Clark. I'm the head of programs with Transaid. We are hosting this webinar today with our partners in Uganda, Safeway Rightway. And the webinar will focus on road safety and measuring the impact of the road safety with a particular emphasis on our Uganda program, which is the Professional Driver Training Uganda project funded by GIZ and their E4D initiative. Just before we start, I should say, first of all, that this webinar is being recorded. So a recorded version will be sent to everybody who registered for this event. Now, there will be some time at the end of the presentation for some questions, and we will do our very best to answer as many of them as possible. For any of the questions we don't get to, we'll obviously get in touch with you via email or by other means to speak about those particular issues. But should you want to make or send us a question, I think the best option would be, there should be a question mark somewhere around the top or the top right hand of your screen. I think it's best that you click into that question mark, type your question in, and then that will get passed to me as we wind down the presentation and enter the Q&A session. As I said, we'll do our very best to answer as many of them as possible, if not all of them. I'm joined today, as I mentioned, by Peter Tibigambwa, who is the Chief Executive Officer of Safeway Rightway. And I am now going to hand over to Peter, who's going to give you a brief overview of the project to remind any of you who need reminding about what we've been doing for the last 4 years. Over to you, Peter.
Thank you, Sam. Good morning, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today, and thank you for the introduction, Sam. As Sam has rightly said, I'll be giving a brief background introduction to the current state of road safety, but also looking at where we started in the last 3 years, sorry, in the last 4 years. Before I do that, just to give you a bit of a brief of what we do at Safeway Rightway. We are a private public sector instituted non-government organization that mainly seeks to promote road safety. And really our ambition, our vision is shaped by the fact that millions of people spend hours traveling on our roads in Uganda. For most of us on this call today, you've somewhat traveled across the road somewhere as a pedestrian. Some of us might have been cyclists, some motorists. We have our children traveling to school. Some of us have been traveling to workplaces, and some of us actually secure our livelihoods through transportation, mainly, and many of those being the people that we seek to train, or those that we've been training over the last few years, and to deliver essential goods and medicines and others, as I mentioned, looking at transport as their source of income. That said, next slide, please. That's important to reflect on the fact that in 2016, a report from WHO indicated that over 12,000 lives were lost on Ugandan roads. Those numbers have not changed significantly. Although, if you follow road safety statistics in Uganda, you will know that there's huge discrepancies between numbers of WHO of 2016 and the Uganda Police Forces numbers. That speaks to the challenges we continue to grapple with when it comes to road safety in this country. We do recognize that a significant number of road traffic accidents are actually attributed to human error, whether as a pedestrian, as a cyclist, or as a driver. The latter is what really shaped the idea or the vision for the project that we are here to share with you today, by recognizing that it's important to have quality professional driver training, specifically for heavy goods vehicle drivers and passenger service vehicle drivers. If we can change that for the drivers of HGV vehicles and PSV vehicles, we believe that we shall have made a mark when it comes to addressing road safety or reducing the incidence of road traffic accidents. In addition to that, we also recognize that road traffic accidents are not only as a result of heavy goods vehicle drivers or passenger service vehicle drivers. It's important for us to recognize the fact that the rate of growth of usage of motorcycles in Uganda, or border borders as we call them here, has been on the rise over the last 10 to 15 years, significantly seeing a sharp rise from 2009 to 2018 as of the numbers that we have, from 100,000 to just under 200,000. It speaks to the road crashes that we hear about that are constantly on the rise. If you may have not seen the statistics of 2019, sorry, the Uganda Police Force reported that all the other road users had seen a dip or a decrease in the number of incidences that were recorded, whereas motorcycle riders and passengers had increased at 20% and 14% respectively. So again, this is an area we are looking at and asking ourselves, how do we move on from the successes that we've had, or build on from the success that we've had when it comes to professional driver training, as we'll share later on, towards motorcycle riders and motorcycle passengers over the next few years. In addition to that, just to take you back to our background to this project and recognizing the impact of heavy goods vehicles and passenger service vehicles, in 2017, in 2015, when this project was conceptualized and then launched in 2017, at the time it was almost impossible to find quality professional driver training for this category of vehicles in Uganda. Most of the drivers were having to travel to Kenya or Tanzania to access such training, or whatever was available on the market. No one was very sure about what the standard was. As we'll share, we've seen significant growth over the years, mainly inspired by the oil and the growth of the oil and gas industry in Uganda. For the standards that are demanded in this sector are much higher. We are looking forward to sharing more of what we have achieved to date in response to the needs for oil and gas and the needs for the transport and logistics sector at large. Next slide, please. So I'll spend the next few minutes sharing more of our achievements, given the work that we've been doing with Transaid, but also to recognize the support that we've had from the Employment for Development Program, as Sam said, from the German government, the Norwegian government, and other development partners, and most importantly, our private sector partners, of whom some may be here with us today, including Total, Toyota, Bolore Transport and Logistics, and Seabed, who have been kind to host us since the inception of the project to date. So over the last 4 years, we have successfully developed and implemented a driver training business plan. We were starting off from scratch when we started conceptualizing the idea in 2015. We had very little to compare to in country in terms of what is a sustainable driver training model when it comes to heavy goods vehicles and passenger service vehicles. We are pleased to share with you that courtesy of our private sector partnerships, we have been able to establish an interim facility where we are fully hosted, have a capacity to train to take on intakes of 15, a minimum of 15 drivers, and train up to 15 drivers every other 2 weeks, which has grown our capacity from ability to train just under 70 drivers when we started out in 2018, potentially training up to 375 annually as we speak today. It speaks to the growth of our fleet as well, from 2 vehicles when we started out, again mainly through arrangements and partnerships with private sector institutions, to 7 training vehicles at the moment. Again, when we started in 2017, there was the big question of what is the standard that an instructor should be trained to in Uganda. Hence our move to adopt the East African curriculum. At the time, we didn't have any instructor in Uganda who was qualified or trained to train to the East African curriculum standard. So we started off at 0. Our ambition was that within 4 years, we would have trained 16 instructors. We moved on to train 23 instructors, not only instructors who are working at the Safe Right Way training school, but also recognizing that the need for training in Uganda is much bigger than what Safe Right Way can address. Hence our intention to train instructors from other driving institutions. So in addition to the 6 that are employed with us, the others are actually, some of them are school owners, the others are employed in other driving institutions, driver training institutions. We recognized that by working with Transaid, it was important to create internal capacity or in-country capacity to continue to maintain the standard of professional driver training. Hence the intention to train master instructors or trainers of trainers. And our ambition here was that we would have at least 4 to 6 within the first 4 years of implementation. We have moved on to train 5 master instructors. 2 are employed with us, 3 are employed with us again, and the other 2 are independent consultants. One is an independent consultant and another employed at a driver training institution in Uganda as well. Whereas we recognized that we needed to train instructors and have national capacity, we also recognized that the capacity for driving institutions was not of the desirable standard. Hence our intention to work with driving schools in Uganda and support them improve their capacity or grow their capacity to the required standards as per the East African curriculum. And we had set out to support 3 driver training schools. As we were going on with the implementation of the project, we had another funding opportunity from the Private Sector Foundation of Uganda, which then supported us to also work with an additional driver training school. So whereas we had planned to support 3 over the 4 years, we are pleased to share with you that we've successfully supported 4 driving institutions. With all this established, our goal that we would train, initially we thought we'd train 800 drivers during this period. After exploring and understanding better the challenges of driver training in country and how much it took to actually make sure that we meet not just the East African standard, but translate the standard that had been defined for the region to the Ugandan needs. We lost time and had to review our targets and then change to aim to train 500 drivers within this period. Pleased to share that again, we overachieved on this target, training over 600 drivers within the same period. We've continued to have follow-on assessments with the drivers and external evaluations, as Sam will share later on. But very briefly to share with you, as I said, road safety was key to us. And through our tracer studies and follow-up and evaluation with graduates from our training school, we found that 90% of our graduates actually feel safer as drivers on the roads. And also going on find that 70% of our graduates who have been invited for interviews have successfully acquired jobs, thanks to the effort of our partners and trainers. Next slide, please. As I mentioned earlier, our ambition was to pioneer the East African curriculum in Uganda. And I'm pleased to share that this has only been done in Uganda. The other countries are yet to pick up on this. And we're pleased to share that the Petroleum Authority of Uganda has actually moved to adopt the curriculum as a standard training document or measure for all oil and gas related training in Uganda. And that we have had partial approval from the Ministry of Works and Transport. As we move forward over the next 2 years, we want to see that the curriculum is fully ratified as standard training document here in Uganda, and for us to explore how we move on, not only to work within Uganda, but work within the East African region and beyond. That said, we all know how we were hit by COVID-19 in the last year. And most especially in Uganda, with truck drivers being heavily marginalized, being looked at as the importers in quotes of COVID-19 to Uganda. And as a result of the stigma and the marginalization they were facing, looking at our position as an institution, as two institutions that are established to advocate for the rights and support professional drivers, we moved very quickly with our partner Transaid, engaged with the Employment for Development program, and we designed a project that would seek to support cross-border drivers, mainly looking at two areas, supporting them in the prevention of COVID-19, and secondly, reducing stigma against the drivers. Our aim was to reach 5,000 drivers directly. And to do that, we had to work very closely with the Ministry of Health in terms of developing awareness material, developing training toolkits for the drivers as well. And then on the other hand, developing a package, prevention package that was within the means of the funding we had available, which included enabling the drivers to have access to sanitizers and face masks or protection gear as they traversed the East African region. In brief, this is what we've achieved. I must say we couldn't have done it alone. We've worked very closely with the Ministry of Works and Transport, Petroleum Authority, many other partners in Uganda, whom I may not have mentioned in this presentation. And at this point, I'll hand over to Sam to share more with you from our the evaluation of this program. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter. That's a really good overview of the project. I'm now going to talk about some of the findings from the external evaluation, and also some of the sort of plans we have for a broader evaluation of the impact of driver training. So we're always at pains to budget for an external evaluation. Obviously, I think most of us are. It's important that we sort of establish where we are in terms of meeting our original targets, but also to take a broader look at some of the project outcomes and some of the unintentional outcomes, for example. The external evaluation was carried out by a Ugandan-based consultant, Annette, who has significant experience in evaluating multiple year programs from international donors. And it focused on those 5 questions which you can see in front of you. So we'll see the progress that we've made in achieving what we set out to do with our funders, GIZ. Some of the contextual factors that have hindered or the opposite, encouraged progress. Also, to what extent the PDT-U project has empowered women. So bringing women into the transport sector through that training into jobs as professional drivers. How cost effective the approach was that we used, but also finally the lessons learned and the recommendations that we can sort of take forward to future programs. Next slide, please. So first of all, Peter has already alluded to many of these. The more astute amongst you will notice a slight mismatch in terms of some of the stats here, and that is, for example, Peter pointed to 23 Ugandan trainers. That is the total amount of Ugandan trainers who have been trained, but 6 of those trainers can only deliver training, theory-based training. So 17 in total can deliver theory and practical, which we're very proud of, and we exceeded the original target, which was between 10 and 12. 4 master trainers, as Peter also defined, master trainers are those trainers that sort of go on to train other trainers. It's a key sustainability mechanism as part of this program, so that we can sort of step back and as and when more trainers are required, these trainers can step up and go into action. So we have 4 there, and we have obviously a new specialist training centre which Safe Right Way will be overseeing and managing, and it will actually operate as a social enterprise, which I think is quite a unique sort of setup for a specialist driver training centre. Over 600, so Peter said, actually it's 642 drivers trained since we started training back in 2018. And that beats our target substantially. Our original target was 500. And then, as Peter's already mentioned, the partial adoption of the EAC curriculum as part of the oil and gas sector, but also 4,000 drivers, or almost 4,000 drivers supported as part of the COVID-19 activities, which we implemented from July to November last year. Next slide, please. So first of all, we were keen to establish the trainees' own perceptions of themselves as safer drivers as a result of having undergone the training. So as you can see from this table, 90.6% of the drivers that were interviewed as part of the evaluation report, and I should say it was 194 drivers which were interviewed as part of this study out of the 642, so a significant proportion. 90.6% of the drivers considered themselves to be safer drivers, and that was as a result of obviously the technical skills that they'd gained thanks to the training, but also, and this was particularly pleasing from our side, they sort of stated it was a growth in awareness of other road users, which we were pretty happy with. We didn't speak to all of the employers who have taken on many of the drivers that have come through our training, but the ones we did speak to back up this finding. In fact, one of the employers in particular, they stated that the newly recruited drivers that they'd taken on from having been through the training at the school were performing at a level higher than many of their more experienced drivers, which was great to hear. Next slide, please. So a quick look at the contextual factors which sort of perhaps could be said to have hindered the progress of our program. The main one, which I'm going to focus on, the main two, which I'm going to focus on, are really the delays in oil and gas activity in the west of Uganda, and as you might imagine, the COVID-19 pandemic, which is still very much taking place. One of the main focus really of this program was road safety. It was about improving the safety on Uganda's roads, but part of that was very much about equipping Ugandan drivers with the skills necessary to do that, to be active agents in making roads safer places, but also to give them the skills needed to sort of take up the anticipated increase in demand for drivers as and when it occurs. That's largely based on the oil and gas activities, but also the supportive infrastructure projects around that particular activity as well. So delays in the implementation of these activities in the west of Uganda, as well as the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, were serious external dependencies, which unfortunately did present a challenge to us achieving greater or improved employment for our trainees, and that was the objective. In fact, unemployment amongst our trainees increased during the lifetime of this program by 18.8%, as you can see from this table, with 73% of trainees becoming unemployed during the last year and as a direct result of COVID-19. And as you can see from this graph, the column on the right hand, which is the self-employed section of drivers, which you'd assume to be smaller operators, they were hardest hit, as you might expect. We can see that the demand for drivers in the oil and gas sector is yet to materialise, with only 15.7% of our drivers being employed by this sector so far. And also one further reason identified, which we're sort of working on strengthening at the moment, is the background from which many of the trainees come from. Historically, it's a sort of a profession which many enter with relatively low levels of education attainment. And one of the things many of the interviewees talked about was more that sort of a need for greater support over the softer skills of applying for jobs. And that's something we're certainly going to be working on in the coming years with Safely Right Way. One important positive to come from this, however, was that the terms of employment have improved for those who are in employment currently, with many of them. In fact, if we take all the figures we actually got as part of this study, drivers are actually earning 30% more than the average monthly salary for truck drivers in Uganda, which is a good thing. Next slide, please. In terms of women's empowerment, our ambition as part of this project was to bring through 10%, for 10% of the trainee drivers to be female that came through the training. And unfortunately, we fell short of this. Enrollment of women, however, has definitely experienced an upturn in the final few months of the project. So we had 17 women enrolled at the end of the project, 9 of whom had already completed the training, which meant that 8 were still undergoing training. So there was a significant upturn in those last few months, which was really interesting to see. It's plain to see that I think going forward, we need to allocate more resources to working with transporters or prospective employers. So first of all, seek their commitment to actually recruiting women in the first place, but also in investing in the appropriate facilities to make those what are currently very male-dominated environments more female-friendly. So 41%, you can see here, 41% of the women we spoke to as part of this study said that being a woman was an obstacle to employment within the transport sector. And 36% said that women earned less than their male counterparts. It should, however, be noted that most of the women interviewed were optimistic about being professional drivers. Many of them actually saw themselves as having a competitive advantage over their male counterparts. And this was further supported by the fact that the majority of women signing up for the training particularly in the last quarter of 2020, did so through recommendations from previous female trainees. Next slide, please. In terms of value for money, we're looking at whether the training was perceived to be value for money by the trainees. And we can see from these two graphs, the one on the left obviously shows that expectations were very high going into the training. And thankfully, we can see on the right that to a large extent, the majority felt that those expectations were met. Next slide, please. In fact, 99% of trainees said that the training had met or exceeded their expectations, which was really, really pleasing to see. 100% of the trainees thought that they were adequately prepared for the job market. and 88% reported that the training was represented value for money. You'll notice there that 10% actually responded by saying that the training was not value for money. I think it takes more a closer look at, or a closer conversation with those people to actually understand their thoughts on that, which unfortunately we don't have data on. What we can say is that all 100% of that proportion of drivers are currently unemployed, which is unfortunate. It should also be noted, and this is in terms of the cost of the training, that most of the training during the lifetime of the project was subsidised. So going forward, we don't have too much of a concern about this, because the driving school under Safeway Rightway's guardianship are competing for and winning training tenders from some of the large transport companies, and we've basically designed it as a model where we anticipate that these subsidies will continue going forward for those most in need of that support. Next slide, please. Finally, recommendations and lessons learned. There's obviously still some work to do on advocating for the adoption of the EAC curriculum. As Peter pointed out earlier, it's now a standard for the oil and gas sector, but our ambition is for it to be a standard for the entire transport industry in the longer term. We've already pointed to a need to strengthen our support to trainees, helping match them with potential employers, and also to strengthen our offer in terms of the softer sort of training skills on offer for them. Likewise, a more deliberate sort of efforts to work with prospective employees to bring women into those jobs. Greater efforts to secure commitments from transporters to undergo refresher training, for us to actually expand our training offer, to invite that sort of engagement on various different levels in different ways with the transport sector itself. And finally, an emphasis on continuing to track impact and using the data that we have to really sort of share that with everybody, and to really embed a culture which does prioritize safety and recognizes the importance of the training. I have one last slide I'm just going to very briefly go into, which talks about the longer term sort of impact of driver training. Next slide, please. So our sort of wider ambitions are to evidence the impact of a positive impact of the training on safe driving behaviour and in the longer run safer roads. So we have made a start on this, and we are doing it according to these 6 pillars, and we're gathering that data by various means. Existing paper-based procedures, telematics data, that sort of thing. But what we hope to achieve is to establish a system that tracks improvements in road safety as a result of the driver training. What that will mean is that we will need to develop these partnerships with transporters, have access to their data, and to track trends over the longer term. I think we foresee this program as being a sort of a 2 to 3 year study. We actually already have MOUs in place with 4 transporters in Uganda, and those MOUs define an agreement which says that the transporters will bring all of their drivers through our training, and they will also be sharing data on a monthly basis so we can track those trends. It's early days yet. We're in a better position than we were a few years ago. We understand the challenges far more. Probably one of the biggest challenges actually is for these transporters to make their drivers available for the time needed to do the training. But I think we're in a better place now to take this forward, and we do anticipate taking this forward with Safeway Rightway over the next few years, and hopefully in the not too distant future we'll be arranging another webinar to present those results. Thank you very much. I think now we're going to go into the questions and answers. So I'm just going to look up on the chat function and see what's coming. One of the things I just wanted to point out was our colleague Edward has shared a link. It's a YouTube link to the project. It's a short film that we developed as part of the project. So I would encourage you to have a look at that when you have the opportunity to do so. Right, the first question, I'm not sure who this is from, but first question is, what did you observe as the areas/aspects in your school and other schools that require the most improvement to meet EAC standards? That's a really good question. Peter might ask. I'm going to give Peter the opportunity to answer this after me, but I will first of all posit an answer myself. I think the biggest challenge we had as part of this program was the development of training capacity. What we found when we first started this this project was that we tried to tap into existing driver trainers. People are already training truck and bus drivers. But what we found was quite a limited capacity in terms of practical experience of handling those vehicles themselves. So many of the driver trainers who were training to CH class, which is a heavy truck vehicle class in Uganda, had no experience whatsoever actually maneuvering that vehicle themselves. And the practical side is absolutely essential if we're going to take on these EAC standards. So it took considerable amount of time to actually get those trainers up to standard. And actually, as we progressed with the project, and there was a need to recruit further trainers, our attention turned more towards experienced drivers who actually took on these skills far quicker than the actual existing trainers did. Peter, I don't know if you have anything from your perspective in terms of a response to that question.
Not sure you can hear me, Sam. Yeah. I think to add to that, definitely it's been a challenge in terms of capacity. And I think one of the things you alluded to is the baseline of someone coming into the training center, because if you're training HGV and PSV, and according to our current structuring or until the recent revisions to the Act and requirements to get a permit, the baseline is that you have a certain level of experience, and that experience is not just about moving a truck, but it's about your understanding, your technical understanding of what the truck is or what driving is. And the ESC curriculum, I think, had taken a bit of assumptions in terms of people who get to that level will have gone through some minimum level of training, have a basic understanding of driving, a basic understanding of what is needed to drive a truck. And we've realized, and as most people will know, we have truck movers in most cases as opposed to truck drivers, or we have vehicle movers as opposed to vehicle drivers, and it speaks a lot to the grounding of our training. So that's challenging. It means that you have to add more time to the training schedule compared to what the standard training schedule would be. But to add to that, the challenges that other institutions face, and we continue to face as well, is there are, I would say, two key ones. One is because of the lack of access to such training in Uganda for a long time, prospective clients for such training, which are mostly multinational transporters, moved on to innovatively find solutions within their own parent companies. So you start the business or you start the training school, but there's almost the prospective clients have found solutions internally. So it takes a lot of movement now to shift the thinking from there's a service you can access outside your own company, because to be sustainable as an institution, you need those clients. And then that again speaks to the affordability of the training, or that is up to the standard. The average driver in Uganda earns 500 to maybe 600 or 800,000 per month. We are talking about, and those are people who are that's average, not lower end. And we are talking about a training which, at the very least, if done well, a refresher training.
I think we're having a slight connection.
900,000 Ugandan shillings, unless you subsidized subsidization within the organ, like we've had at Safer Right Way. So making it accessible for the interested parties on the market, but also in a way that the schools can continue to break even in relation to the East African curriculum requirements.
Thank you, Peter.
Thanks.
There are a couple of quick questions here. So are the trainers that are trained, do the trainers that are trained belong to private driver training schools? And the very simple answer to that is yes, they do. In fact, in Uganda, all the truck and bus driver training takes place within the private sector. So very small driver training schools, as compared to somewhere like Tanzania, which is where I am at the moment, where all the truck and bus driver training goes through government-run giant institutions. They just don't exist in Uganda as things stand. So they do all operate within the private sector. And as Peter pointed out, we did provide substantial support to a wider pool of driver training schools as part of this project. Next question is the 30% higher salary specifically for drivers trained by you only in the oil and gas sector, and generally in Uganda for truck drivers? That's a good question. I can only partially answer that question. The 30% higher salary was just for drivers that have been trained by the project. Now, I don't actually, it's an interesting point. I don't actually have the data which links how many of those people were linked to the oil and gas sector. Although I did point out in the presentation that somewhere between 15 and 16% were employed. So I think that benefit is far broader than the oil and gas sector, but that is an assumption to some extent on my part at the moment. This might be a question that might suit you more, Peter, knowing the context far better than I would. Why would women drivers get less paid, as conditions of service for drivers would be immaterial of sex? And maybe you could talk a little bit about sort of the Uganda context specifically.
More anecdotally, so this is not something we've looked into in depth or research to have intentional research about it, but from conversations with female drivers, who are not many, so probably talk to most of those who have been into employment in HGV, we see that in most places where the women are employed, they are not employed for long distance travel for different reasons, company policies, and experiences the female drivers have. The average female driver is in Uganda, Ugandan female driver, I think, as far as we know, there's only 2 who have the highest HGV license. For those of us who understand what was called the CH license, or now C+E license in Uganda, because they are very few, and those are, when you drive at that level, the higher you go, the more payment that you get. The larger pool of women are at a lower level. Now, if they compare their average earning to the average driver, then it looks like they earn less. And secondly, as I said, when you're in HGV driving or PSV driving, most of your earning again is aligned to the mileage that you cover. So you have a retainer payment in most companies, and then you earn per mileage. And because women, most of the women who have been employed are only employed to travel within Kampala or closer distances to Kampala, that usually has an impact on how much mileage they can do and how much they can earn. As we go into the next 2 years, these are the areas that we want to look into with expert support, see how we can actually advocate for the female drivers to access more opportunities, and for us to have equity when it comes to opportunities for both female and male drivers in a way that is also sensitive to the needs of the companies where those women will be employed. Thanks, Sam.
Thank you, Peter. Yeah, Peter alluded to there that we're currently negotiating for a second phase to this program, which will focus on women's participation within the sector. So hopefully in the not too distant future, we will be in a far better answer to provide a sort of a status update on the detail behind some of the data and some of the and answer questions like that in a better way. Final question, because I know we're running over time, and this is to you, Peter, again. You mentioned the need with motorcycles. Are you doing anything with motorcycles, or are you looking into this?
Thank you for the question. I don't know who asked it, but it's a good question. Are we doing anything about it now? No. Are we looking into it? Yes. We will be starting a project that will be focusing on training motorcycle riders, but also supporting motorcycle passengers with primary focus on the Kampala South metropolitan. If you're familiar with the Kampala region, which is the region that is most affected when it comes to road traffic accidents and incidences of motorcycle-related accidents in Uganda as well. So we are looking at identifying motorcycle riders as road safety champions. Will be taken through training, and then we'll move on to train their peers on safety, and as a priority, promoting usage of safe helmets for both rider and passenger within that region. In addition to also linkage and liaison with the emergency services in the area, because again, it's seen that in most cases where there are cases of accidents or incidences of road crashes, border riders, for both wrong and right reasons, will be the first responders. We want to focus on for the right reasons and looking at linkage between that first response with the emergency services, which is the ambulance service, and the National Referral Hospital as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. I'd also like to signpost anyone listening to the Transaid website, where you can access our knowledge centre online. We carried out what I think is the most extensive study on the uptake of motorcycle taxis. We finished that at the end of 2019, and that's a 5-country study. Uganda was one of the countries which was covered, so take a look at that if you're interested. There are more questions, but as I said, we're going to come back to those questions via email and contact you separately. We will try to get through all of them over the next few days. Thank you very much for your time. You can see Peter's and my email addresses on the screen now. Please, if you'd like to get in touch, pop us a message. Any questions at all, we'd welcome that. And thanks again for your time today. And we'll hopefully see you all again soon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.